Dystopia warning, obviously. A few people asked my opinion on the kind of media circus surrounding Labour over the last couple of weeks, and I'm happy to share my opinion on the matter. But it's an opinion that's backed up by watching the Conservatives, the scandals, the crimes that played out for the best part of 14 years. Nothing about my opinion genuinely comes from any form of tribal loyalty to Labour, despite having voted for them for most of my life. So if you want to hear my opinion on it, carry on listening. If you don't want to, you can just not listen. Now, I think this ferocious media backlash, deep dives into associates and donors of Labour, much of which has been entirely absent for the last 14 years, hasn't got anything to do with law breaking, rule breaking, corruption or cronyism, because there's actually, and I'll make this very clear, no evidence of that occurring. If there was, I'd be on it like a rat up a drain pipe. What's going on is unfortunately extremely predictable. It's a feeding frenzy. This feeding frenzy, when you strip it down to its base, is essentially about honesty and transparency. When you strip away the faux outrage and the sensationalism. This is actually a consequence of 14 years of a Tory government failing to transparently declare, in order to avoid scrutiny and obfuscate their links, which was routine under the former Tory government, which in effect made it more difficult to root out any form of scandal or corruption, which is why a lot of the people caught up in lobbying scandals, i.e. Scott Benton and the gambling lobby, was found via a investigation of people going undercover. And when Owen Paterson was accused of breaking lobbying rules, well, Johnson and a bunch of other senior male Tory MPs holed up in the Garrick Club and tried to change the rules rather than let him face any form of accountability. But it wasn't just a case of a lack of transparency. It wasn't just that it was harder to uncover the scoops, it's that they didn't want to. They weren't inclined to uncover the corruption in the Conservative Party. It's not hyperbolic to point out that most of our media in this country is right-wing, partisan, overtly on occasion, and massively biased. That used to just help the Tories, but increasingly it's helping other privately educated right-wing frauds like Farage. Now, on occasion they were forced to act, but usually when it was so bad that they had no choice but to. But the scrutiny, if present at all, was apologetic, weak. It certainly wasn't the headline on most occasions, and usually only occurred if the scoop was too tasty to pass by. Much of what I've learned about what the Conservatives have done have been from investigative journalism. And the day that I read most of those articles by investigative journalists, on the same day, the front page of the Mail or the Sun would basically be carrying a promo headline for the Conservative Party. There were instances of prominent newspapers just getting rid of an article after a call from Number 10. A prime example of this was the Times piece about Carrie Johnson. The Times printed an article about Johnson trying to get his then mistress, now wife Carrie, a £100,000 a year job paid for by the taxpayer when they were having an affair. When I pointed this out to Gabriel Pogrund at the Times the other day, interrupting his stream of sharing hundreds of anti-Labour articles, despite there being no evidence of wrongdoing on their part, guess what he did? He deleted the tweet. Hence why I had to quote him. No reply though. Funny that. Then there was also the case of Number 10 calling up the BBC to complain about Emily Maitlis daring to tell the truth. Then of course there was, the chair of the BBC sorting out an £800,000 loan for Johnson, whilst Johnson was trying to weigh up who's going to make chair of the BBC. I mean, God, probably the bloke that's sorting out an 800 grand loan for him, eh? Now, every single political party has donors. It's been that way since the dawn of time. Lord Ali, who has been thrust into the spotlight, is by all accounts a respectable human being and a long-term donor to the Labour Party. Yeah, he's been supporting them for 25 years. But now, because Labour has donors, like every other political party, it's being used as something that's an automatic indicator of corruption. Trust me, after watching the Conservative Party descend into the abyss, I know corruption when I see it. There's no evidence of it here. But why might the media not like Lord Ali? Could it be because he demanded a crackdown on bullying papers, perhaps? He's also called for the introduction of mandatory voting to actually reduce the influence of money in politics. What a bastard. Then you look at the Tory party, their donors like Frank Hester, the man who made misogynistic and racist comments about Diane Abbott. But one of the most lucrative donors of the Conservative Party was the wife of Putin's ex-finance minister, Lyubov Shchurkin. A woman at one dinner alone who stumped up £135,000 to have dinner with Theresa May, the then Prime Minister, or the Russian oligarch and personal friend of Boris Johnson, and since 2011 donated over £730,000 to the Conservative Party. So that's £2 million from the wife of Putin's former minister, who for her troubles got to attend monthly meetings with the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. Were minutes taken? Were they bollocks? Was this all over the news? Of course it wasn't. You know, it's just a national security risk. It's just the Conservatives being funded by Russian oligarchs. But were people asking what they wanted in return? Were people going, oh, Johnson, what do the KGB want, you know, for all that money that they're giving you? Yeah? Nothing. Then Johnson went on to make the son of a KGB agent a lord, Lebedev, who co-owns the Evening Standard and the Independent. Yeah, the same Evening Standard that once George Osborne had finished trying to decimate the country with austerity by being a failed chancellor, that he decided to toddle on over and become the political editor between 2017 and 2020. In the same way that Michael Gove has just become the new editor of The Spectator. In the same way that Boris Johnson now writes sexist pieces for the Daily Mail, because this is how it works. Now, I had to pull Johnson up on this, obviously, because my Bridget Jones law is almost as good as my knowledge of their corruption. He claimed that work from home might stop Bridget Joneses from finding their Mr. Darcy. Because firstly, of course, that's why women go to work, isn't it? To try and find some cock. I think he's judging people by his own standards here, because as I pointed out, Bridget Jones didn't meet Mr. Darcy in the office. She met Daniel Cleaver, a super hot guy who actually turned out to be a boy. But yet out of work, she met the human rights lawyer, Mr. Darcy. And circling back to what I was trying to come at Gabriel Pogrund about earlier, the thing that scuppered you, Johnson, trying to give your then mistress a £100,000 a year taxpayer-funded salary, was Conor Burns walking in, allegedly, on her giving you a blowy. What this all ultimately comes down to is something that they like to call optics, or how things look. Nobody's really talking about how it's being made to look though, are they? Or why? I concede that Labour are idiots to have taken a lot of the gifts that they have, knowing that this lot would be right on their arse, despite it not being particularly out of the ordinary. This stuff is allowed in parliamentary rules as long as it's declared honestly and transparently, which it is with Labour, but it wasn't with the last lot. In the wake of a cost of living crisis, doesn't look great to accept free gifts, no. But Labour didn't create the cost of living crisis, did they? Them lot did. And this isn't tit for tat on my part, because there's nothing to compare it to. Labour aren't immersed in lobbying scandals like the Tories were. However, if you want to focus on optics, where was the rolling coverage about that bizarre borrower, tiny little Rishi, a near billionaire, travelling almost exclusively via helicopter and sending the public a £40 million bill for it, whilst running on a campaign, literally putting in his manifesto that he will cut welfare by billions, 12 billion to be exact, to fund tax cuts for the richest in society. Or Liz Truss spending £500,000 on one flight and then making us pay for it. Or Johnson spending the cost of a house, best part of 200k, on renovating a very temporary residence, number 10. Now again, none of this comes from a position of just blindly defending Labour. I think they've made some terrible choices here. This is about the issues we have with our media in this country, and how many people just gobble it up unquestioningly. This campaign against Labour is nakedly and ferociously disingenuous. It feels a lot more like false equivalence dressed up as accountability and scrutiny. I wonder why a media class that openly supported and enabled the engineered decline of society and rampant division, which led to race riots, would want to undermine the integrity of the new government by creating a false equivalence. Despite the wholly inaccurate phrase, they're all the same, fueling the far right and other bad actors who cash in, literally, on political apathy, division and discontent, which led to people, in part, trying to burn alive asylum seekers in hotels. Hotels that they were only in to be used as a visual scapegoat by the former government, at great cost to us, not just monetarily, but in terms of the breakdown of the fabric of society. This isn't news. It's sensationalist opinion dressed up as fact and put into headlines. Journalists are supposed to act without fear and favour, but it's wall-to-wall favour and fear that they're not going to get the scoop, therefore compliance. That's how scoop culture works. It's planting a seed that Labour are just as bad as the last lot. They've been in power for 3 months. Much of that has been spent trying to fix the crises that are happening in virtually every institution in this country, thanks to 14 years of the Tory government running the country into the ground. It's relatively routine events and how they're being made to look, not the substance of the matter or the facts. Now, why might newspapers like the Times, the Telegraph, with a relatively affluent readership, want to attack a government that's removing non-dom status, taxing private schools, paying public sector workers properly, and is rumoured to be considering an inheritance and capital gains tax? It really is a head scratcher, isn't it? There's also, I have to note, an innate classism and sexism surrounding this. One of the most working class governments in our history, being labelled as freeloaders and scroungers. Sound familiar? The exact thing that's been thrown at single mums and benefit claimants for the last 14, 15 years. The working classes and the poor are called scroungers, but when the Tories or the Royals do it, well, that's fine, isn't it? The thing that pisses me off about that is how many people subscribe to it that are not rich themselves. If Sue Gray was a man, they wouldn't be using her wage as a way to emasculate the current Prime Minister, sneeringly going, oh, who's really in control? Didn't hear a peep about her Tory equivalent under the last government being paid pretty much the same as her, and more than that Prime Minister. And the broadcasters wearing £1,000 pair of shoes, earning the best part of 250 to 300 grand a year, like Chris Mason, Laura Kuenssberg, etc. Falling in line because free Tories head up the BBC. We've got a real problem with the press in this country. Beneficiaries, vested interests, and the way that they all profit from political apathy. And much like the situation that we're in politically, there aren't simple solutions to complex problems. And maybe it's because I'm working class and I've got a chip on my shoulder, but I notice the microaggressions towards, especially, the first female chancellor that we've got. It's automatically assumed that she doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. Let me get me started on Rayner. There's a scroll of overt misogyny towards her. And why does it happen? Why are Tory MPs and the media class, almost all of whom went to private school, kicking off because a bunch of working class people now run the government? Could it be because those Sloaney pony shaggers and general upper class elves think it's their birthright to be there, to have the power, because their parents paid for the advantage, calling us scroungers when they think that they're entitled to be paid by us, to rule over us and make our laws? Well, tough shit. Much of this is a storm in a teacup, designed to undermine faith in the new government from people that are well aware that reform are snapping at their heels, and that the Tory party has essentially set itself on fire by morphing into the Farage party. They know there's profit in chaos and disorder, and they want more of it. I think the important thing to do is to ask yourself who benefits from this. Because it's not an overcorrection from years of not holding the last lot accountable, it's a conscious decision, because there is no evidence of wrongdoing. For me personally, it's been enraging and galling to watch them suddenly understand what scrutiny is. And in my next video, join me as I point out how fucking ridiculous it is that Labour have inexplicably decided it's not in the public interest to have Leveson too. What the actual... I don't have any faith in inquiries anyway. They're just a way for powerful rich people to get let off the hook and avoid criminal charges. But if Labour don't implement press reform, not only do they lose, we all do. It will pave the way for Prime Minister Farage, for fuck's sake.